welcome back to B.HookedCrochet.com. I'm your host Brittany, and welcome back to video number 2 of the Yarnspirations Big Tartan Crochet Super Scarf tutorial. So at this point, what we covered in video number 1 is rows 1 through 10. So in joining on with this video, you're going to need to have your scarf crocheted up to row 10. And now in this tutorial, we're going to cover how to crochet rows 11 through 25. And we'll talk a little bit more about this technique of changing colors. So I'll bring your attention again to the written instructions and the diagram and even the picture. So really the idea that we want to have here is we just want to get an idea of what this plaid pattern is supposed to look like. And there are 2 main repeats, something that we'll notice. So this is the first repeat where we have this color pattern. And now we're moving on to the second half where we have a completely different type of pattern. So in order for us to continue on with the new part of our color pattern, we need to start working off these bobbins that we were using in the first section. So the things that you need to have prepared for this next section is, and you can reuse some of the bobbins that we used once we trim them off, but we're going to need 4 bobbins in your contrasting color B. We're going to use 2 bobbins in our contrasting color D, and we're going to use 1 bobbin of our contrasting color A. So go ahead and get those prepared, and then we're going to jump right into row 11. Now once you have all of your bobbins lined up and ready to go, and you have your scarf so that the right side is facing towards you. And I sometimes find with this pattern that's a little bit tricky for me to really determine which is the right and the wrong side, which is a good thing. But in terms of keeping track of the pattern and making sure we're on the right rows, we really do need to know which is the right side and the wrong side. And so I have just taken a stitch marker and I have marked where this side, which is the right side. So that way I always know that the side with the stitch marker is the right side. I recommend doing that if you're having trouble keeping track as well. So what we want to do is locate our very first stitch right here where we did our fastening off just a moment ago, and now we're ready to join on our first new bobbin. So we're going to be working with contrast color B, and then we'll just simply pull that through and make a chain 1. So if you're following along with your written instructions, we're now working on the 11th row. So on row 11, we're going to add a single crochet to our very first stitch, and I'm working over this tail as I go. And then if we read the instructions, our repeat this time is that we're going to chain 1, skip a stitch, and single crochet. And that makes sense as we're looking at this, because our next stitch, instead of being that chain 1 space, is a single crochet. So we always have to chain in order to skip that stitch. And then we'll just proceed with our repeat. And now to finish off this color, we'll chain 1, skip a stitch, and then just work half of our single crochet in that last stitch. Now we're going to add in our next color, which is color D. Make that single crochet in the first stitch, chain 1, skip 1. Work that across this little white section. And then just work half of that stitch. Grab your next color. This time we're going back to color B. And now transition to color A. And now switch back to color B. And now switch to color D. And now one final color transition for this row, and it's going to be back to color B. And then don't forget to work your last single crochet in that stitch, and you can finish that stitch off. Now I wanted to give you a little tip about what I have been doing in order to keep track of these bobbins. So one little thing I have found is that the shorter you leave your strand from the ball, the easier it is to manage. So I just make sure that they're rolled up and that there's maybe about no more than a foot of slack on that. And then what I do is, as I'm working with these bobbins, so as I'm pulling them forward, I'm laying them in my lap. And what I do at the end of the row is just remove them from my lap and just place them forward, just right in front of where the color is. And now once I have all of my bobbins in that forward position, so on the table, sort of behind the project, then what I like to do is just remove my hook, and I'm just going to flip my work in this direction. And as I do that, it is creating a twist up here in the bobbin, but that's okay because they're laying in order now. So this first one that we're going to use is on top of that twist. And so this technique has really worked out well for me, and I'm sure that with the space that you have after you've crocheted several rows of this scarf, you'll kind of get your own groove and figure out what works. So don't give up on it just yet if you're getting really frustrated with trying to keep these bobbins in order, because I really think the payoff in this scarf is going to be worth the trouble. So before we move on to row 12, it's best if we do a little bit of housekeeping here. What we need to do is weave in these tails from where we did our color transition. And then where we just added these new ones, we can just go ahead and trim these off. And I'll demonstrate just quickly how I do this. Now right now we are looking at the wrong side of the work. You can see that because my stitch marker there is on the other side. And so this is the side that we want to weave them in. And I'm just going to go underneath several of these stitches just on this first row. I'm just going straight across and then just pull that through. And you don't want to pull too much so that you're pulling the yarn is so tight in one direction that it distorts your pattern. But once you have that woven in once, you can just trim that tail and move on. So go ahead and do that for your remaining tails, and we'll come back and we'll start on row 12. Alright, so off camera I went ahead and switched over my project so I have all of my bobbins in place and ready to begin the 12th row. So as we've covered before, there's really nothing new with this row. The only difference is, of course, that we're working with these new colors. So we're going to start off row 12 by making a chain 1 and then single crochet into your first stitch. And now you'll notice our repeat says that we're going to single crochet in the next chain 1 space. So you'll see that right there. And then we'll chain 1, skip a stitch, and single crochet into the next. And then just repeat that until we come to our next transition. And once we make our single crochet in that last chain 1 space, then just go immediately into that next stitch, work half of your stitch, and then pull that bobbin towards you. So you're probably really getting the hang of this by now. So we'll just quickly breeze through our 12th row, and then we're going to start another repeat. This is a short repeat, but we'll work on that next. Now let me just point something out to you real quick. Something that I have found really helpful is, you see this straight line here? This is where we did our bind on, where we added this new color. And we worked over it once with this row, but I find it really helpful to work over it again. Even though this is the wrong side of our work, there still is a chance with it being a scarf that you'll see this side. And so instead of making my single crochet just under the chain and then leaving that loop or that strand exposed, I'm just going to work my hook under that strand and then work my single crochet. Now you see how that pulls it out of the way? It just makes it look a little bit cleaner. And you really only have to worry about this when you do your color transitions. So it'll really just be every so often. And then you can see it again here with this orange or the gold color, so we'll just hide that under the stitches as well. Okay, so at the end of this row, you'll make your single crochet in that chain one gap space, and then don't forget to make a single crochet in your very last stitch. And now we can finish the stitch up, and we're ready to begin our 13th row. Well, what we need to do first is go ahead and situate your bobbins so that they are ready to go for the next row. So from here, I'll bring your attention back to the written instructions, and if you take a look at where we see the 13th and the 14th rows, your instructions are as 11th and 12th rows, joining C at the end of 14th row. So this wording can get a little bit confusing, but let's break it down into words that seem to flow a little bit better. And we're going to repeat rows 11 and 12. So the 13th row is going to be worked the same as row 11, and the 14th row is going to be worked the same as row 12. So that's what I need for you to do right now, is work your 13th and your 14th row. So once you've reached the end of your 14th row, your scarf should look something like this. We have a few, actually 4 rows now of this color pattern, and now we're going to change things up a little bit. One other important thing I will point out is that we want to be looking at the right side or the front of our scarf. This is very important as we move on to this next row. Now, if you are reading the written instructions, it does say to join color C at the end of the 14th row, but I found a different way that's a little bit easier. So we do want to keep this color B attached from the end of the 14th row, but what we want to do with it is just pull up a loop that's, you know, a few inches long. That way we don't worry about it working out or anything like that. And I have all of my bobbins situated up here. I'm just going to leave them there, just carefully crochet my project and leaving them in place. And now we just want to take our color C, so I have a little bobbin here with color C, and I would recommend creating a slip knot because we're just going to join this on for this one color. And we'll insert our hook into that first stitch. And I do want to make sure that this white bobbin, the one that the working yarn where this loop is attached, I want to make sure it's in the back. So I don't want to lock it into these stitches. Okay, so just pull it aside, place your new color on, chain one, and then single crochet in the same stitch. And now we're ready to just start following along with the written instructions. Now, this row is slightly different than our usual stitch pattern, so just keep an eye out for that and what I'm doing, and because we're going to be doing something a little different at these joins here. So we'll jump right into our repeat. After we made our single crochet there, we're just going to chain one, skip a stitch, single crochet into the gap space. And so this part is the same. Just repeat that until we get to the transition. And so at the transition, we have our single crochet in that last chain one space, then we're going to chain one and then single crochet into that last colored stitch there, that last white stitch for me, and then single crochet into the next stitch, so the first of the next color transition. And we're going to do that at each join as we work across this row. So now we're ready to just chain one, skip a stitch, single crochet into the space. Do that one more time. This is a shorter transition. Chain one, skip a stitch and single crochet, and then single crochet into the next stitch. Okay, so that is our repeat. And now at the end of your row, we should end up with a single crochet in that chain space, and then we have 2 stitches left here. So we'll just chain one, skip one of those stitches, and then single crochet into the last stitch. And we'll finish this stitch off, and now we're going to fasten off. So just trim yourself a tail and then pull that through the loop on your hook. After we've finished our 15th row, we're going to jump into a few more rows that are repeats from what we've already done. So we'll quickly go through those since we've already covered them in the tutorial. So we're moving on now to row 16. And row 16 is a repeat of row 12. So just scroll back up until you find the 12th row in your written instructions, and that's what we're going to follow this time around. Now we left all of our bobbins in place because we're going to be using these same colors. And all we need to do now is find that loop and place our hook back on the loop, and then we'll chain 1 and then make our first stitch in that first stitch from our 15th row. And then we'll just jump into our repeat. We have a chain 1 space right next to it, so we'll single crochet into that chain space and then chain 1, skip a stitch, single crochet. So our typical repeat now. So as you're looking back at your work, what we did with our 15th row is we created that really cool little horizontal stripe. So since we have the hang of row 12 already, go ahead and finish up this row. I'll meet you back at the other end and we'll talk about what to do next. So now at the end of row 16, we're looking at the wrong side of our scarf here. And I went ahead and arranged everything and turned my work, and so I'm set up now to start row 17. Now this little end from where we did row 15, you can go ahead and weave that in now, or you can do that later, whatever you decide. And now we're coming into another section that's a significant repeat. So we have 17, 18, and 19. Those rows are all a repeat of what we've already covered, and actually what we've been doing in these last few rows here. So row 17 is the same as row 11. Row 18 is the same as row 12, and row 19 is the same as row 11. So I encourage you to go ahead and look at your written instructions and crochet up rows 17, 18, and 19 based on what you see there and based on what we've covered in the tutorial. Then come back to this video and then we'll talk about what to do next. Once you finish up to rows 19, your scarf should now look something like this. We have an additional little section where we have 4 rows of this color pattern that we've been working on throughout this video. Now the next thing that we're going to do in row 20 is we're going to create another one of these horizontal stripes. And so we have to have our scarf set up a certain way in order to make this work out correctly for the pattern. So when I finished off my 19th row, I went ahead and organized my bobbins and I turned my work. So I would be ready to crochet from this direction into the opposite direction. And you want to make sure that when you're starting your 20th row, you have the right side of your scarf facing up, okay? So when you have that accomplished, we're going to add on this color C for our 20th row in the same way that we did back in row 15, where we just pull up that loop and leave it there, hold those out of the way, leave your bobbins where they are, and then grab your color C and create a slip knot. And now holding your working yarn and your loop out of the way, insert your hook into that first stitch, place the loop on your hook, pull it through. Now you'll chain 1 and single crochet into the same stitch. So the setup is the same, but you'll notice we're starting at a different point of our pattern, our stitch pattern. So here, instead of doing the chain 1 like we did down here, we're just going to proceed like we have been. When we see this chain 1 space at the beginning, we're just going to single crochet into it. Now we can start our repeat. Chain 1, skip a stitch, single crochet. Chain 1, skip a stitch, single crochet, and just continue until we've reached that last chain 1 gap space. So we'll single crochet into the chain 1 space. Then we're going to single crochet into the very next stitch, which is the last one for that color. And then we'll single crochet in the first stitch of the next color, and again into the chain 1 space. So this time we have a total of 4 single crochets right there together in a row. Now we can move on with our repeat. So chain 1, skip a stitch, single crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch, and here we've reached our last chain space for this color transition. That means we've made our single crochet there, and then we're going to go into the next stitch and go into the stitch after that, and into the chain space right after that. Now moving on, we'll do our repeat. Chain 1, skip a stitch, single crochet, now we've reached our last chain 1 space, single crochet into the next stitch, and the stitch after that, and the chain space after that. So are you starting to see the pattern here now? It's not necessarily a certain number of stitches that we're waiting before we add these 4 in a row, but we're doing it at the color transitions. So we just want to repeat this until we've reached the end of our row. And when you've reached the end of your row, you'll make your single crochet into that last chain space, and then single crochet into the last stitch. Now just like before, we're going to fasten off this color join here. So color C, just trim your tail and pull it through. Now just like we did when we started our 16th row, we're just going to slide our work over, so we're not turning or anything like that. We just want to get back to this working loop here. Now going back to our written instructions, we just finished our 20th row, and the next line of instructions we see are the 21st to 24th rows. Now as you'll notice, we're narrowing in on finishing the entire pattern repeat for this scarf. We just have a few more rows left to cover, and most of them are repeats, so we can just breeze right through them. So paying close attention to the instructions for the 21st, 24th rows. We're going to be repeating rows 11 and 12. So this same pattern that we see right here, we're just going to be adding it up here. So row 21 is going to be the same as row 11, 22 is going to be 12, 23, 11, and 24 is going to be the 12th row. So what we want to do, and we'll just cover this beginning part real quick since we have a non-traditional way of starting this row from our last row 20. So we just chain 1 like we did before, and then we want to single crochet in our first stitch. And again, we should be working and looking at the right side of our scarf. So now we want to chain 1, skip a stitch, and single crochet, and then repeat. And then we'll pick up our next color, and from here on out everything should be familiar. This is the same stitch pattern we've been working with, and we're working with the same colors here. And as we come to the end of our color pattern repeat, what I need for you to do at this point is crochet up your 21st through the 24th rows. So as I said before, we're just adding on this little section right up here. Go ahead and crochet that, and then come back to the video. We'll talk about the final row for this pattern repeat and what we need to do in order to finish our scarves. Okay, so once we have finished the 24th row of our scarf, our pattern should now look like this. And we're just one row away from being finished with the entire repeat for the scarf. So now we're ready to begin the final row in our pattern repeat. And if you look at the written instructions, it's row 25, and it's a repeat of row 3. So row 3, all the way back here at the beginning, was when we were using this particular color pattern. So that means we're going to switch things up this time. We're going to fasten off each one of these as we work along. So you'll want to get your bobbins ready. We'll need 4 of the gold bobbins, 2 of the white, and 1 of the charcoal. So that's 4A, 2B, and 1C. Go ahead and get those prepared, and then we'll come back and learn how to work this last little section. As you can see, I went ahead and finished up my final row, which was row 24, and I still have all my bobbins attached. So if you want to work it this way, all you would do at this point now is trim off each of your bobbins, and you want to leave yourself some room to weave it in. And now you just want to leave those there, and we're going to weave them in either after this next row, or you can weave them in right now. Now I'm just left with my working tail, and I'm just going to pull that through the loop on my hook. And we're ready to begin row 25. Now row 25, as I mentioned, is a repeat of the 3rd row. And so you're already familiar with this. We'll go through the technique of how to add on our new bobbins one more time. You should be getting the hang of this pretty well by now. So we've turned our work, and right now we should end up with the right side of the scarf facing us. And then we'll just loop our new bobbin, which is color A, pull that through, and then chain 1 and single crochet into the first stitch, and I'm just working over that tail behind. And now our repeat will start with a chain 1, skip a stitch, and then single crochet into the chain space. I do encourage you to look at the written instructions before you try to memorize this pattern, because even though we are just repeating the same 2 rows of stitch pattern, it's really easy to get thrown off a little bit if you forget to make one of these chains, or if you make a chain and you're not supposed to. It can throw things off at the end, and then you're kind of left confused. So I don't really have to rely much on the pattern at this point to give me instructions. Really all I look for is just where the repeat starts. So here we did the single crochet, and then we chained 1 and then skipped a stitch. And then, you know, the alternative is where we do our single crochet and then we crochet into our gap space. Now we'll just add our second color. So we have color B here. Single crochet in that first stitch like we always do, And our repeat's the same. Chain 1, skip a stitch. You can trim these off as needed. Now we're going to add on color A again, which is gold. Now we'll transition to color C, which is charcoal. And then back to color A. And then color B. And then finally, color A. And then we'll make our last single crochet in that last stitch. And that finishes off the 25th row and our entire stitch pattern repeat. So now what we need to do is repeat this a whole bunch of times until our scarf measures 93 inches long. So our instructions say that we're going to repeat the 2nd through the 25th rows, and that's starting after here. So we always want to make sure 25 is worked the same as row 3, and then from there the next row will be 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 25 again. Now something I find really helpful is to use a stitch marker just to mark the beginning of my color pattern, well, in my stitch pattern repeat. So the the repeat for the scarf, I'll mark it on the next row. So here I've just finished up row 25, and then jumping into what would be our second row where I make the chain. Then I'll just add a stitch marker into that chain. That way it's just a visual cue for me, so I know that's supposed to be row 2. And from there, whenever you have to place your project down, or if you get distracted, or you just simply get lost in the sea of words and the different color patterns, you can go back to your stitch marker and you can just count the rows. And the way I count the rows is I just count the single crochets. So I would say, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then maybe go back 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and just kind of zigzag by looking at these single crochets. So if you're watching this in real time, I am actually crocheting my scarf with you. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to take a long pause, and we have to crochet our scarves until they're 93 inches long. So we're going to have several of these repeats, and I would just recommend working it and measuring as you go. So we're going to measure from this bottom chain here. So from here all the way up to the other side needs to be 93 inches. And once you've finished crocheting your scarf so that it's 93 inches, there are a few finishing things that we need to do. We're going to add a vertical stripe on the scarf in part of the pattern, and then we're also going to add fringe to the bottom. So we'll talk about that in video number 3. But for now, finish crocheting your scarves, share your progress with me, because like I said, I'm doing this with you. So use the hashtag #BigTartanScarf, and you can use that on Instagram or Facebook, and I'll be able to see your progress. And if you have questions, leave them in the comments here or leave them on my Facebook or Instagram pages. Good luck with the rest of your scarf. I'll see you back in video number 3.